we come to the next part of the story of the parish of St James. In a previous video we saw how the building of St James's Mission Hall was begun in March 1891 and it opened on the 24th of October of the same year. It was always intended that the area of Upton would become a separate parish with its own church, and the Mission Hall was the first step in making this happen. The church was to be built on land next to the Mission Hall, which was a disused quarry. Although William Lavers was the prime mover in the building of the Mission Hall, on his death in 1894 he had put a clause in his will that set aside money from his estate towards the founding of a new parish to be called St James's, with the stipulation that this should happen within 2 years of the death of his sister Caroline Lavers. Her death is recorded in the Torquay Times of February the 7th, 1908. It begins, "Regret will be general throughout Torquay, but more particularly will it be felt in the parish of Upton at the death of Miss Lavers of Upton Lee, Teignmouth Road, which took place on Wednesday." That was the 5th of February. The article recounts how she had long been an invalid and seldom left her beautiful home, and despite sufferings was ever mindful of the needs of others, and was a great friend to the poor of the parish of Upton. It goes on to mention the clause in William Lavers' will that at his sister's death the land upon which the St James's Mission Hall stood and an adjoining plot of land, together with an endowment of £150 a year towards the salary of an incumbent, and a sum of money for the erection of a new church, should be available for 2 years on condition that the parish of Upton was divided and a new parish to be known as St James's was constituted. It points out that this clause had now come into effect with the death of Miss Lavers. The Torquay Times is, as ever, a very useful source of information. In fact, the front page of the issue for the 23rd of December 1910, well, it informs us, "Always remember that the Torquay Times, being the recognised universal newspaper of Torquay, read by all classes and entering almost every home, gives far better value for the money locally than can be had by any other means of publicity, whatever be the form what it may." Well, I suppose you can't say fairer than that, unless of course you're a rival newspaper. It is in this edition that we find a brief announcement in the local news section. St James's Parish. The new ecclesiastical parish of St James's has been created at Torquay by a division of Upton Parish, and through the munificence of the late Mr William Lavers, the new parish is provided with an endowment of £150 a year. The official creation of the parish is recorded in the London Gazette of the 6th of November 1910. The London Gazette is now part of the Gazette, which incorporates the Belfast Gazette and the Edinburgh Gazette. They are official journals of record and largely consist of statutory notices, and they are available online. The issue for the 6th of December 1910 tells us that on the 28th of November, the King had ratified the decision made by his council on the 28th of July 1910 that the parish of St James's should be founded. The Gazette gives a brief history of the founding of the parish, as well as a description of the boundaries. There is a reference to a plan included with the documents that were establishing the parish, but sadly this isn't available online. As can be seen, the description is quite detailed. However, it is possible to map out the boundary of the new parish. The district of St James's, Upton, Torquay being all that part of the new parish, sometime district of Upton, in the county of Devon and in the diocese of Exeter, which is bounded upon the west and upon the northwest by the parish of Tormeham, upon the northeast by the parish of St Mary Church, upon the southeast by the new parish of Ellacombe, all in the said county and diocese, and upon the remaining side, that is to say, upon the south, by an imaginary line commencing upon the boundary which divides the said new parish of Ellacombe from the said new parish of Upton at the junction of St Mary Church Road, Bronze Hill Road, and the road called Mudge's Hill, and extending thence first southwestward, then northwestward, and then again southwestward, along the middle of the last mentioned road for a distance of 20 chains or thereabouts, to its junction with Lymington Road, and extending thence southwestward along the middle of Lymington Road for a distance of 6 chains and a half or thereabouts, to its junction with the road leading across the Upton Valley Pleasure Ground into Upton Road, and extending thence northwestward along the middle of the last described road for a distance of 4 chains or thereabouts, to its junction with Upton Road, and extending thence northeastward along the middle of Upton Road for a distance of 2 chains and a quarter, or thereabouts, to its junction with the road called Tor Vale, and extending thence first northwestward and then southwestward along the middle of the last mentioned road for a distance of 8 chains, or thereabouts, to its junction with Teignmouth Road, upon the boundary which divides the said new parish of Upton from the said parish of Tormeham. Perhaps it ought to be pointed out that a chain was 22 yards or just over 20 metres. At the beginning of the following year, in the 13th of January 1911 edition, a longer article by Reverend E.P. Gregg was printed in the Torquay Times, that best value universal newspaper for Torquay. On page 6, we read, St James's Parish. In the Upton Parish magazine, the rector, the Reverend E.P. Gregg, writes as follows in reference to the new parish of St James's. The new parish of St James's, Upton, has at last been formed. If this had not been accomplished by next month, the money set aside for the stipend of the new clergyman would have been diverted towards other objects. After 3 years of vexatious work and anxiety, we can rejoice together that the work is so far accomplished. What remains to be done is the appointment of a clergyman for the new district, but that is a matter which is in the hands of the Church Patronage Society. We can, however, pray to God that the patrons may be guided aright in their choice. At this season we are disposed to look backwards as well as forwards. When I came to Torquay in October 1883, I found a little cottage service conducted on a weeknight in an upper room in Prospect Place, which was used ordinarily for a private school. In 1887 I built a mission cottage, which is now the Upton Constitutional Reading Room. This opened on the 16th of June 1887. The present mission hall opened October 24th, 1891, and was built by me on land presented by the late Mr. Lavers. The article continues, in the case of each building I was assisted by the contributions of friends. Excellent lay help has always been forthcoming from time to time in the carrying on of the services. Many of our readers will recall the names of the late Dr. Paget Blake, R.N., Mr. R.J. Parr, now the Director of the NSPCC, and Mr. S. Boulade, J.P. Dr. Odell has been for some time past conducting Sunday evening services in the hall with much advantage to the people who worship there. Voluntary organists with voluntary choirs have hitherto furnished valuable aid in the conduct of divine worship. The present hall is licensed for public worship and is capable of seating about 250 persons. The land on which it was built is part of the site given by the late Mr. Lavers for a church. It has been reckoned that there is, in addition, space enough for a church capable of seating 800 or 1,000 persons. The population of the new district may be roughly estimated at about 2,450 and is increasing. I feel sure that the new clergyman, when appointed, will meet with kindness and helpful sympathy at the hands of those amongst whom he is called to minister. As our own parish will be smaller, I am hoping in the future to come much more in personal contact with my parishioners. It would have been very difficult to move if 250 people were crammed into the building that is the current St James's Church. It reminds me of the game of sardines, and nowadays it would break a whole host of health and safety rules. However, perhaps the most interesting phrase in what the Reverend Greg said is, "After 3 years of vexatious work and anxiety, we can rejoice together that the work is so far accomplished." This would suggest that the birth of the parish of St James's was obviously not without its struggles and traumas. However, the parish had been formally established by the end of 1910, and all that was needed now was a vicar, which is the subject of the next video.